Good morning, everyone. I would like to thank you for attending our webcast today. And if you are logged in, I'd like to make sure you're attending the Sharing Location and Topo with Architects. My name is Kristen Tilwick. I am an account manager here with Synergis, and I will be introducing Kevin Spear. We'll be doing our presentation today. And what we have found is that this is a topic of many of our customers have come to us and looking for some information on how they can communicate better with their architectural team, and how, hopefully you'll walk away with some tips on how to speed that process with some Autodesk solutions here. We'll show you that just with some simple tweaks that you can impact your workflow, and what we found is that we can help you guys benefit the entire team. So a couple just housekeeping items. We will be taking questions, so feel free to type some questions in the questions pane. I will be fielding those, and just Kevin will be answering them at the end of the presentation. But as I said, feel free to type those questions in there. There's a lot of great information we're going to cover today. And like I said, hopefully you'll walk away with just take a couple minutes from today's presentation to help you take back to your office and increase your productivity. And with that, I am going to turn it over to Kevin to start the broadcast.
Good morning, everyone. It's a bright sunny day as opposed to the monsoon of snow that we had over the weekend. Still sitting, I don't know, 3 or 4 inches on my front lawn here in the Lehigh Valley of Pennsylvania. Anyway, so sharing location. My background, who am I? I'm a licensed engineer. I've been doing civil engineering for 20 plus years, and the issue was always communicating with architects, back and forth, really. I don't know if we just don't like each other, or even with construction, how do we get these things laid out? It always seems to be some difficulty. So before we move along here, in the webinar interface, you have the ability to raise your hand, of course. So by a show of hands, has anyone tried to do something like this in the past? Sharing the location or topo between disciplines. Has anybody tried that? Okay. I got a couple of responses there, so not many though. That's good. I think it's good that I'm talking about this topic then, I guess is really what I'm saying. All right, so let's move on into the presentation here. So the agenda is very, very simple. First, I'm going to show you where we end up, what the coordination actually looks like. And then we'll back up and go through the individual steps. And then have a chance for some detailed questions there at the end. So as we often have tried, when you are trying to get this thing done, just things aren't lining up, it's a mess. But with some effort, right, you get your happy face on, a little happy dance. But what if we could just get this right the first time? How do we do that? So here's what it looks like when we're starting. So here I am in Civil 3D. There's nothing fancy about this surface. I'm in a particular state plane coordinate system. If I do my normal Civil 3D thing, you can see that I am indeed in a particular coordinate system, which as we always should be. I then shared that to Revit, and then Revit looks like this, of course. And generally they look at things through different levels, so they orient things to their project base point, which is typically a corner of the building. I've got a very simple building here. I'm not an architect. I would never claim to be, but I got a door and a couple of windows. What more do you want? Who knows? Anyway, but we do have a site view, and you can see that the topo does show up where it's supposed to based on that coordination, as well as the location of the building. And if I take this up into a 3D view, you can see we're actually sharing the tin not a version that Revit thinks that is the 10, as would often be the case. And if I zoom in here a little bit, you can see we're actually sharing the resolution that came from Civil 3D directly with Revit. It looks a little bit awkward because of the way things get shaded or not, but rest assured it is the actual 10 surface. So that's where we're going. Yes, as I said, that's a very simple building. Anyway, so that is where we're going. So, all right, so let me jump back to the PowerPoint briefly. How do we do this? The steps are relatively easy. So for sharing location, we export, the tool exports an XML file. Then in Revit, we simply import that XML file and things get adjusted. With topography, there's a button that we click to publish the topo, which creates a drawing that gets used in Revit as a link. There's a specific command to link topography. And it reads that drawing file and creates the topo, a native Revit topography object inside of Revit. Lastly, the one thing I guess I might have overlooked is that we can also bring the footprint back into Civil 3D. So should the architect change the footprint for some reason, now they're on the right coordinate system, I can see any tweaks that might happen to the footprint. Doors added, roof leaders, whatever they want to put in the model, we can get notified by it by just bringing it back. So it would be a simple export of a drawing and then extract that into Civil 3D. So that's the basic idea of the workflow. Let me back up one step. Right, so the steps are relatively simple. There are some things that we need to set up in order for things to communicate properly, because in the past we haven't done these steps, so those variables, those system settings just were ignored, for lack of a better way of describing it. What am I looking for? One more slide, I guess. So, oh yes, there we go. Let's go ahead and jump into the software and see what happens. So you probably didn't see where we started either. So here's my Civil 3D surface. Here's my orientation of the building. If I switch to Revit briefly, you can see that I did indeed share my topo, and we are looking at the actual curb return as modeled with the Civil 3D surface. I apologize. All right, so that's the nutshell of where we're going to end up. So let's jump back into Civil 3D, and I'll go to where we get started. All right, so the first thing we need to do is jump over to our settings. So anybody that's used Civil 3D is familiar with the drawing settings. On our Units and Zone tab, of course, we have our state plane coordinate system that would be in play for our data set, where our project is. In the need requirement within Revit to consume the data, we have to tell it in the XML file, and what gets exported with the surface is a transformation. Meaning Revit works off of a grid, and when we're in Civil 3D, we're essentially working off the ground, even though we generally work planar. So I've got to take a reference point and take those local coordinates and put them in the grid coordinates so that all of this handshaking works okay. So I'll take this little pointer here, and let's just say we pick the corner of the building. Oops. It helps when you actually pick the corner of the building. There we go. And then I've got to cut and paste the local values to the grid values. So a single pick, Control C, single pick, Control V. Nothing fancy about that part of it. And then I'll simply click OK. So that'll help with the translation once we're getting into Revit. So I picked a reference point, and I've copied those local coordinates to the grid coordinates. Okay. Now I'm able to go ahead and create the location information that I need to share. That tool shows up inside of the toolbox, and I need to make this a little wider. And there you can see under my subscription extensions, the shared reference point tool. So all I'm going to do, as you would normally do in the toolbox, is double click. And it's asking me for the origin. I'll pick that same origin. And it wants a point on the y-axis, so I'll just grab this other point. Notice it grabbed an elevation. This polyline footprint that I currently have in the drawing is at that first floor elevation. So that's how that was grabbing it. My drawing units are, of course, feet. For whatever reason, it doesn't read the drawing units of my file, so I just have to manually pick that. We'll click OK. And now I have to tell it where to save it. So I'm saving it inside of my BIM 360 project. So there's my the file name, my shared reference point.xml. You can see the original one I used there. So I'll go ahead and save that into a structure. Kind of feels like we're browsing a network server, but instead of a D drive or whatever, or F drive, there's a BIM 360 node, just like, you know, Dropbox or anything like that. So I've got some projects that I'm a part of, and then inside of a given project, I've got some project files, and we've got a couple of subfolders depending on which team we're on. So I'm going to put this in the civil folder and save it. That was hard, right? Where's the Staples Easy button? All right, so let me jump to Revit. And I will close all of this. We'll leave that level up for the final, but I'll go ahead and open my starting point file, which is again on a local drive. And just so I don't get confused. Okay, so there is my building. I'm currently on level 1. Level 1 is set to a project north, and that's pretty standard for how architects would work. But if I look at the site plan, we can orient to true north. So you can see I've got these blue symbols down there in the corner of the building. At the moment, project north and true north are essentially identical. What we have is a project base point. And if I'm lucky enough to be able to pick it, I'm always horrible at this. I always pick other things. There's a survey base point. The survey base point is what provides a Revit the ability to keep things with small coordinate values, but understand where we are in the world. It'll make more sense once I actually import the location data, because these things will separate. All right. So now that I'm here, how do I import that location information? Well, on the Revit side, it shows up on the Add-ins tab amongst all your other add-ins. And there is the tool, Import Shared Coordinates. So I'll click the button. And the first thing that it's asking me is select that origin. So I'm going to snap to the endpoint here. And then for the direction, again for the Y, I'm going to snap to that endpoint. And now it's prompting me for that XML file. Again, browsing just like you would normally any other file. And there's the file that I just created. So I'll click open. Are you sure you want to create a new shared coordinate system? Yes. Successfully created. Awesome. Nothing changed because the current Revit project still thinks it's on the original local coordinate system. So we've got to go in and tell it to use the new location information. So on the Manage tab, we've got this location button. And when I go to the Site tab, you can see it's still set to the internal coordinates. What I want to do is take that new system that we just created and make it current. When I click OK, now you can see my orientation for my, so in my site view, right, this is the rotation. There's my project base point. Right there's the elevation. And if I zoom out here, there is my survey base point, which is at 0, 0. So it's sort of like an XREF, right? Zoom way in, right? We're good to go. We go back to level 1, and everything is still orthogonal, just like an architect would love. Okay, so we got our location into Revit. How do we get the topo? So let me jump back to my drawing. The topo is just as easy. Again, once I've got all that set up out of the way, I'm going to go to Collaborate in the ribbon in Civil 3D. And here on this Share panel, we've got a Publish Surfaces button. In this particular drawing, I only have one surface, but we could publish multiple surfaces. So if you had to deal with rock or limestone or whatever strata, whichever word that is, you could put all of those levels of earth and rock and so forth in your Revit model. So I pick my surface, and you can see this is going to write, it has to write to that BIM 360 folder. So let me pick the location, make sure I'm in the right spot. Sales support is the project, civil team, and I don't want to call it complete. This is my first stab at it. Oh, that looks good. So another thing to note, it puts this .shared, .dwg as a suffix to your file name. Don't take that out, it needs that. So we'll click Save. And then OK. In order for this to work properly, it's going to change the surface style that Civil 3D uses so that Revit can figure out the tin. Because currently all I'm showing is contours. But really, Revit needs to see all those tin faces. So it's going to do what it needs to do. So we'll just go ahead and publish as needed. Perfect. What's happening in the background, which I haven't been talking about, is the Autodesk Desktop Connector. And if I take a peek here, I might have missed it. But, oh, there it goes. So it's going to take a second to publish that up to the cloud. So when I wrote the file initially, it's actually writing it to a local sync folder that you don't know where it is. That's kind of indifferent. But the tools know where that is. It sees a new file, and then it syncs it. All right, so I can get rid of that, close that down. So that's the Autodesk Desktop Connector. All right, so if I take a look back in Revit, how do I bring in topography? On the Insert tab, we've got several ways to add data, and one of those buttons is Link Topography. So by default, this goes out to your BIM 360 projects that are shared with you. So there's my folder, right? There's my civil team subfolder. There's the one I just created, site plan. I'll click link. And cross your fingers. Topographic elements are not visible in your current view. What does that mean? Well, currently I'm in an architectural level 1 view, and they typically limit vertically and horizontally what's visible so that they can focus on whatever the point of this level is. So I could either change those options so that we could see it or switch to a different view. I'm going to switch to a different view that we've already got open, so our site view, and there's our topo. Looks a little awkward here in this plan view orientation of that. So let's go to that 3D view, and there we go. So this is indeed not the final version, right? This is, I just did it. So I'm not trying to cut corners there, but that's the actual surface we just brought in. All right, so I just threw a bunch of things at you, from Civil 3D settings, and then a couple of tools that are in Civil 3D to export and publish, and then now to import and link. The last step would be to take maybe this revised footprint. As you can see, now it's got a notch in it, and send that back to Civil 3D so we could update our footprint. Or maybe even use this as the footprint if we chose. So what we can do in Revit is duplicate our views, and I'll rename it, call it site export or footprint export. Yeah, that looks better. Well, let's put it so that's at least organized together. We'll leave it site footprint. There we go. Why is that helpful? Well, I don't want to modify those views. I want to make this view specific because what we can do is create or use what's called a view template, much like a style in Civil 3D. It's the same basic idea. Certain things are on or off based off of a given template is what they are called in Revit. So I'm going to copy the current one, and we'll call it site footprint. And what I want to do is, go to the model and tell it not to show the topo. I just don't want to see the topo. I can probably turn a bunch of other things off too, but it's a very simple model, so I don't have to be that specific. So now that's set up. Very easy. Click OK. And if I take a look at the properties, you can see it's actually using that new view template. All right. Now that I've got this kind of configured, I can go ahead and export to a DWG. And much like eTransmit in AutoCAD, this is somewhat the same idea. So I'm going to go in and configure this a little bit. I'll make a new setup. So we'll say site footprint. And what I care for the site footprint is that if we have, we're doing a 3D view, I want to make sure these are solids, not a mesh, just to keep AutoCAD from going nuts. And then for units and coordinates, we want to make sure we're at feet, and I definitely want to use our shared coordinate system. So that's pretty straightforward. We'll go ahead and click OK. So now we're using that setup for export. Go ahead and click Next. Now we're telling it where to save it. So in theory, let me go to my computer, and I could publish this, again, because generally the civil team and the architectural team are different places. So this is a great way to exchange data, right? So for the architectural team, we'll leave it the long one, that's fine, just so it's different from the original one I did. Click OK. Again, that's going to again, just a coordinate issue, that's fine. We just click cancel. Come down here. It should see the file. It should publish. There we go. So if I wasn't on one machine, I'd have to wait, I don't know, what was that, 10 seconds for it to push up to the BIM 360 platform. And then, of course, wait 10 seconds for it to come back down to me on my desktop, again, through this desktop connector. And then within AutoCAD, I'd bring up my reference manager, attach a drawing, and browse to that location, which I'm already there. And you can see my new file name. If I could pick the box, there we go. You can see I just saved that. So click that file, choose open, and everything that we would normally do here would still be typical, such as overlay, no scale, 0, for insertion. All that stuff would be typical, so we'll just click OK. And there's our footprint. So now I can come and fix my ooh, I grab my hatch. I don't want to grab the hatch. I grab the polyline. So, you know, you could add a vertex. Right, these simple things that we can do now. And now my footprint's updated. Or I could leave the building in there as it is. And that's how we get the building back into Civil 3D. So most things are coming from Civil to Revit, but in this case, we could bring the footprint back as needed. And because we're linking through the BIM 360 site, if either the Civil team or the architectural team update those pieces, we would just like a normal XREF, right? I could just reload the XREF or update the link in Revit. Those things would just refresh. It's kind of the beauty of that. The other piece that I wanted to mention that we have kind of glossed over is BIM 360 is kind of at the core of all of this. So what does that look like? So here is a web browser into BIM 360. I'm actually at the document management portion of my particular project, but I could go to the project home. And it's much like any communication portal for different types of applications you can see out there. So there's my project name. If I had an address to find, it would show a map. There's construction aspects to this that I just don't even have time to get into. But one of the pieces that I'm utilizing is the document management. So very similar to any cloud-based system, as I mentioned before. So, you know, SharePoint's kind of a similar idea. Of course, Vault has the enterprise version of this, but this is in the cloud for us AEC folks. So there's my project files, and there's my 2 subfolders. And you can see the initial uploads are version 1. I've actually done a couple of versions on this other one I was playing with earlier. Right, so it just iterates a new version as I upload it. So that's the nuts and bolts of BIM 360. How do we get connected to that on our desktops? That is through the desktop connector. It's just a simple add-in app that sits in your system tray, works off of your Autodesk login. So just like the desktop app that works off of your desktop login. So it's one sign-in and across all of Autodesk on your computer. Works off the same credentials. And so it's automatically got me signed in there. Okay, so that's BIM 360. That's the desktop connector. Where do we find the tools? Are these tools out of the box in Civil 3D and in Revit? In the case of the location tools, it is not installed out of the box. It is something that we have to add in. So if you noticed, this shared reference point is sitting in the toolbox under subscription extension. Well, historically, that had been one location on the web. They've since centralized where that ends up. And in fact, if you go to your manage.autodesk.com portal as a user, you can see all of the products that you've been entitled to use. And in this case, I want to look for Civil 3D as a tool, or the Autodesk AEC collection. Either one would do the trick. So in that particular product, I don't want to download the software, of course, but what I'm looking for is updates and add-ons. And I can search. I'm going to be lazy. Let's do ref. There's the tool, shared reference point for Civil 3D 2019. This download is only for the Civil 3D side of this equation. I would have to do this same download for Revit. So search for Revit. We'll find my tool. Oh, there it is. Again, go to the updates and add-ons. And I'll search for reference, shared reference point, and then I would download that. In this current release, 2019, you can see the release date there, September, and of course the software comes out here shortly in the next month or so. So there is a bit of a lag there. They do realize that's an issue for a lot of people. So the intention is to not wait until the end of the summer to give this to most people. I don't know the actual date, but there has been concerted effort to make it not as delayed. So that's the location tool. What about the publish? This is actually installed now. I can't remember if it was in the original 2019 release or if it was in a particular .1 or .2 release. I don't recall that. But it does get installed if your software is up to date. So that just sits there. And then on the Revit side, this link topographies button actually been there for a while. So it's there by default as well. So we don't have anything to install. Let me see. Is there anything else that I'm missing? The Autodesk account, BIM 360 as the handshake between. And then our 2 bits of software. So yeah, that's it in a nutshell. So let's take a look at something here real quick. So let's restart the PowerPoint real quick. So are there gotchas? When it comes to location, there's not a gotcha there with Civil 3D. That's just how we do things. We put things in state plane. We make sure that all those things are there normally. I guess we just have to make sure we do that transform option in the settings. It's not really a gotcha per se. On the Revit side, we definitely have to set the project itself to the shared coordinates, even though we may have told it to be true north or whatever in a particular view. We still have to tell it to use those shared coordinates. On the topography side, some people like to apply a render material to their Civil 3D surfaces. Currently, that creates issues occasionally. I can't pin it down to a particular reason, but if you don't apply a render material, it always works. So that's what most people do, actually. And then on the Revit side, you just have to set a view template or set up your overrides so you can see the 10 lines and confirm things look as they do. Architects could, of course, cut sections and elevations to make sure the surface is doing as what they expect. So that's the gotchas. So I guess we're now to the questions. All right, so time check, we're just a little bit past 11:30, which is good. Kristen, do we have questions?
Actually, yes, Kevin, we have several questions here. So first one is, what if your civil file does not have the building laid out yet and you just have a survey file?
That's okay. Let me get back. Sorry, I tabbed too far. So yes, I made an assumption on location initially to publish that. So I can't particularly push that to the architect. But you could do the step where the architect ships you the footprint. And then when the architect ships you the footprint, then you could round trip the coordinates back to them. But in that case, this wouldn't fall in the right spot, right? I'd have to move and rotate because it would just come in at 0, 0. I'd actually have to move it to wherever it needed to be and whatever rotation that needed to be. That's the only thing there.
Okay. There is also a question, if you are not working on BIM 360, can you just do this on your normal network drive and not use desktop connector?
Good question. When it comes to the location piece, you can absolutely do that without BIM 360. The piece that requires BIM 360 is publishing the surface. That requires BIM 360 docs or document management in order for Revit to understand the information. That's just how it's been set up. I don't know the particular reason, but that's how they've decided to move forward in centralizing, I guess, communication between architects and engineers.
Okay. Another question is, I've always had trouble linking in the site plan after I've set up shared coordinates for some reason. Do you have any tips for that?
Sure. Well, not my PowerPoint. Let's go to Revit. There we go. So typically, well, I don't want to say typically. Let's back up 2 seconds. Revit people, in my experience, tend to work in 2 different camps, just like AutoCAD people do. Either the building is simple enough where everything's done in one file, or could be done in multiple files where you break out the structure, MEP, etc. The same could be said for site, where you can have a site Revit model. Especially if you've got a campus, right? It's the same building copied over and over and over. It's a very similar idea. I guess the trick really is to have a site level in wherever you want to put it, and make sure it's set to true north for that particular view. When we bring in those coordinates, that's what's going to do the rotation in that particular view. If I go to the level 1 where I'm set to project north, it's never gonna rotate. We don't want it to. The coordinate value, this is still going to stay 0, 0 in this corner. So that's the part that's by default. The third piece there is we want to make sure on the Manage tab that we've told the location of the project to use that shared coordinate system. I think those are the 3 key pieces there. Does that answer the question?
I believe so. I don't have a follow-up to that.
Okay.
I do have one other question. Are different versions of Revit and Civil 3D compatible? In other words, if you're using Revit 2018, would engineers have to work in Civil 3D 2018?
That's a great question. Ask it one more time because I was thinking about the first half of that. Ask one more time.
So the question as worded is, are different versions of Revit and Civil 3D compatible? In other words, if you're using Revit 2018, would the engineers have to work on Civil 3D 2018? So do they both have to be in the same version or different?
Right,
versions?
right. The piece of that that's going to drive it one way or the other is the BIM 360 docs aspect. I don't know that Revit 2018, when we go to insert link topography in 2018, so in 2019 it only goes to BIM 360 docs. I think previously you could link a Civil 3D file anywhere. But it didn't actually work the way that it was intended. So I'd have to research that question to truly answer it, because once we've exported the tin, there's no. I mean, it kind of is what it is. It's kind of version agnostic. It's been that way for a while, but I don't know if it matters on the Revit side. I'll have to confirm that.
Okay, we can contact the individual who asked the question, or actually send it out, you know, as information for other folks if that's
absolutely
a question that everybody wants. Yeah,
that's gonna be important for many firms, I would imagine, actually.
Okay, I think that's so that's all the questions I had coming in. Let me just make sure. That seems to be everything. So, and as I said, we can take that question offline and get the information to everyone. We will be doing a follow-up email and actually phone call from your account manager for all the attendees to just kind of dive a little deeper into this topic, some of your feedback from this presentation, and if there's specific questions for your individual firms, how we can help you make sure that you do implement this into your workflow, or just how that moving within your firm. So I didn't know, Kevin, if you had anything further to wrap up?
No, I mean, so we've got two things there. Confirm the versions match or not. And then I think I probably need to reach out to the architectural person and discuss specific tips or issues that person was having, and then maybe share that with the audience as well.
Okay, perfect. So to wrap up on our end, I want to thank you all for attending today. Some great questions, good information, Kevin. I think as the questions were populating in, it's obviously something that is of interest to the folks on the call and colleagues as well. I did mention at the beginning, popped on afterward, that this is recorded, this webcast. So feel free, if there were some folks that were not able to attend within your organization, or some colleagues that this may be of interest to share this, the link to our website where you can access this recorded webcast. As I did mention, we will also be contacting everyone who was on the webcast to discuss this information. Lastly, I also wanted to mention we do have our Synergis University, our customer event that's coming up in May. You may have gotten some information from us. The date is scheduled for May 9th at the Sands Event Center in Bethlehem. So a great day of extended training, some good insight, industry insight into the Autodesk direction, the technologies, the BIM 360 technologies will be focused on. And we have our technical resources presenting, so Kevin will be there, and as well as the rest of our AEC and manufacturing teams. And we do have some great keynote speakers and some Autodesk folks as well. So it's a great full day of insight for users and all to attend. So look for that. We'll also be reaching out as well to individual customers. So with that, again, I thank you so much for your time and attention today, and have a great day.